A strange thing happened with the gas crisis in 1973, which was an immensely influential thing even after it ended, because people who had, at that point, up till that point, I think, from when I had come in '69, people were still anxious to bail out of the city, particularly after the riot in '68. More middle-class people were leaving. In fact, our landlord offered to sell us our house for $16,000, and we didn't cash, and we didn't have $100, so we couldn't buy it. And today, I'm sure it's legitimately worth over $1 million. But anyway, people were still bailing out if they could, and if they could unload their property. And then in '73, really '74, that started to change because it became so impossible to get gas to come downtown, and there was really no metro. There were only buses, and the only thing to do was drive. That it got people interested in, buying the older houses that were not immediately on DuPont Circle, but were a few blocks out. And suddenly our landlord started bringing people to see our house. And it was kind of funny because we considered ourselves very countercultural. But so did these people from the suburbs who we considered like the essence of straight society. They had jobs. They went to them every day. They had, beyond jobs, we had jobs, but they had careers. And it was the oddest thing. They had all these ideas for fixing up the houses, and we felt, like making them terribly formal and just ruining the hanging out ambiance of 16th Street. It was terrible. And we really disliked them, I'm afraid. But eventually, that was, to me, the real beginnings of mass gentrification came from that idea. Like in a lot of places, there was kind of a critical mass. I think it was spurred a little bit by the urban renewal in the '50s. But as the pace of development started in the early '70s to pick up downtown, there came to be a group called Don't Tear It Down, which fought for some specific buildings. It grew a little bit out of course, the famous case of the old post office pavilion, but also out of the National Church of the Covenant, which was a very beautiful church at 18th and M, which it was an unsuccessful fight. It got torn down in 1964. But that was the sort of the sacrificial building like Penn Station in New York that galvanized people and got them thinking, and they formed Don't Tear It Down, which fought very hard for another unsuccessful fight, the Rhodes Tavern at 15th and F, the old Ebbett. And that was played out in the courts. Eventually that was lost. But that kind of got preservation to critical mass as a local movement that was concerned with something other than just significant homes of great men, and literally great men, not many women. And it eventually evolved into a more multi-faceted organization, the DC Preservation League, that employed also developers, lawyers, architects on the board to figure out like strategies more long-term for factoring significant buildings into future development and that sort of thing. It's always been a little bit of a tense mix between developers and preservationists, but developers have saved a lot of buildings, maybe more than preservationists. The city definitely had a very neighborhoody feel to it then. Today people talk about that. I think it's more lip service. There was a lot more of a sense of identity, like I grew up on Barney Circle, or I grew up in Swampoodle or whatever, and people all knew what that meant, where those places were. And they were long-established neighborhoods, which today, their names on a map, and I think they're much less as real, exist much less as real communities and more as ideas. One thing I'd say about the old city was it was very organic. Things grew up kind of because there was a need for them to be there, and there might be bread factories around 7th and U Streets, Florida Avenue there, because that was a good location for them. And it was much less that people sat down at a drawing board and said, here's how we really want to organize this. Things were much less sanitized too. Like when I look at pictures of the new fish market, I mean, in many ways that'll be nice, but in many ways I think we'll miss sort of the apparent disorderliness or the kind of functional way the old one organized itself. I think that was more at this kind of substitution for organization that evolves with all of its imperfections, with a plan that's supposedly perfect, but then, can never take into what the real factors are into use. So, I mean, I see a danger of Washington becoming a very sterile kind of planned Xanadu, which, we're all familiar with, movies and books about dystopias. I worry that it's going to turn into like the best and most rationally planned dystopia.